for top schools. But it is definitely helpful to talk about what Columbia wants. So on this slide, I have some information on what Columbia is looking for. And a lot of this is based upon what questions they ask in their application. That can tell you a lot. Also, me having been a student and also being an interviewer for the school. The first thing is that Columbia is super sensitive to a two-way fit. Are you a fit for Columbia, and is Columbia a fit for you? They are more sensitive to this than some of the other M7 or top programs. So definitely something to be very aware of. For example, a few tips here are that they see NYC as the center of business and perhaps the world. So they kind of think of themselves as being the center of everything that's happening, and they see their location as very impactful. And they really like to see fit and or awareness of some of their unique offerings that tend to be a little bit different from other top programs, such as some of their specialties in real estate, luxury goods, family business, etc. So these are some really good things to think about when you're proving that two-way fit. Secondly, Columbia really cares about well-researched and super clear defined career goals. Some schools are a little more flexible about, oh, are you kind of exploring? How are you thinking about it? Is your long-term goal a little vague? Columbia really wants to see that you've thought this through. So definitely be very clear and highly defined in what your goals are. Third is that they're looking for diversity in all different ways. So not just your background, right? Not just your ethnicity, sexual orientation, religion. They also are looking for diversity of thought. So that's something very important to think about when you're looking at your essays and how you can communicate your value and how you might be a different type of thinker or have a different perspective or thought leadership to offer. And then lastly, number 4 is the usual things that top schools look for: natural leadership ability, community engagement, analytical capability. So that's pretty much going to be true for any top business school. So overall, these are key things to keep in mind when you're writing your Columbia essays. So now let's go into the first essay question, which is, what is your immediate post-MBA professional goal? And this is 50 characters maximum, not 50 words, 50 characters. So here I like to include this because even though it's not technically an essay, I like to include it because it's really important. They are specifically asking about your immediate post-MBA goal and giving you only 50 characters because they want to see that you can articulate your goal very clearly with very limited room, right? So the more brief you have to be or more concise, the more clear you have to be about your goals. So I included here some really good examples of how you could execute on this question. So for example, the first one is a poor execution, where you would say, oh, I want to work in CPG, or I want to work in some industry. That's a poor execution because it's vague. The next one, the good execution, would be saying working in marketing for a CPG company. So that's pretty good. Now we have clarity on, you have some sort of functional expertise or some skill you want to use and an industry of choice. So now we're starting to get a little clear. And then what I think is a really great execution is marketing for a healthy foods focused CPG firm. This is a great execution because it goes beyond just talking about functional expertise and industry, but also a interest of yours and also hints at perhaps a mission or your why or your vision. So I had a client actually write this for their Columbia application, marketing for a healthy foods focused CPG firm, which really hit on their personal story that really had a lot to do with their love for healthy food and how they want to bring that to more people. So you can consider this a great execution. So some sort of function and industry, but adding in that little extra something that makes it more specific. So now let's go into what is usually considered the first essay question. This is a real essay. It's 500 words. They ask, through your resume and recommendation, we have a clear sense of your professional path to date. What are your career goals over the next 3 to 5 years? And what is your long-term dream job? So keep in mind that 50 character question they just asked, what's your immediate post-MBA goal? And now here they're asking about what's it looking like in 3 to 5 years and then long-term. So again, Columbia is really interested in, hey, I want to understand what's happening with your entire career path going forward. So I have a couple of different ways of how you should tackle this. So the first bullet here is about being specific. So again, really honing in on being specific. What exactly is it that you want to do? Is there an industry, a function, a specific type of company, or an example company that you're interested in? Getting really clear, as crystal clear as possible about this. Another thing that I think is important here is that if you are sponsored, say you're sponsored by a current employer like a McKinsey or a Bain or a BCG, you're going to want to share that information as a midterm goal because you'll most likely be there for 2 to 3 years before actually moving on to that 3 to 5 year goal that Columbia is looking for. So definitely mention that as well if it's relevant to you. Now, once you're really specific about kind of that 3 to 5 year view, you want to explain that long term vision. And I use the word vision on purpose. They ask about your dream job, which really showcases they want to know about your dreams, your vision, kind of what you're thinking, not just specifically about a job title, but also what's going to be driving you. So I love to talk about impact here, showing that you want to make big impact and you have a big vision. Columbia wants to know you're going to be an exciting person to have as a graduate of the program. You're going to make impact. However, you want to make sure that the impact feels somehow achievable. So the example I share here is, say you want to solve world hunger. Well, that's not the best thing to say for your long-term dream job because it's so huge and almost sounds so ridiculous because it's such a huge vision. But if you said that you had a specific type of new business model for achieving larger impacts in addressing world hunger that you wanted to share, then yes, that would feel a little more reasonable. It's still a really beautiful vision. It still has big impact. It's still kind of meaty enough and sexy enough, but someone could wrap their head around saying, sure, I might believe that this candidate can actually achieve this in their future. Then two more points for this particular essay. You're going to want to link then your 3 to 5 year goals, any kind of midterm goal, and that long term vision to your background. So, this is connecting the dots of, hey, you have that resume and recommendation that they mentioned in the question. How does this past experience align in some way to where you're going? So, it's really important here to create some sort of argument for how you've had certain experiences, skills, or networks that align to this future vision. Of course, it doesn't have to be perfect, right? You still are going to business school because you're presumably filling some sort of gap that you need to get to those goals. But you still want to showcase what you're bringing to the table. In particular, I find here the light bulb moment can be helpful to share. For some individuals, they might be pivoting or moving slightly in their career in some way from what they were doing pre business school. So, sharing some sort of origin story or a light bulb moment of how or when you decided on these long term visions or goals can be helpful. Think of it almost as like a superhero origin story of, I realized that I had this power. I realized that I had this vision when XYZ happened. That can be helpful in terms of how you're linking your background to these future goals. And then lastly, I think this goes without saying, but share that why or that motivation for these visions or career aspirations. A school that asks very specifically about your why is Stanford. But I think it's a very smart thing to include in the Columbia essays because you're showcasing why you actually care about this vision and these goals. You could be doing a lot of different things. You're presumably a very smart person. So, why are you doing this particular thing, or why do you want to do this particular thing? So, do try to share a little bit of who you are underneath the hood of the car, something they may not know from your resume in your essay about what's driving you. The other thing about sharing this why is it can really help to make you more human and help you to really stand out amongst the crowd when you're writing your essays. So, highly recommend this point, even if it's short. So, that got us through the first long essay. Now we go into their essay number 2. This one I find people tend to kind of misstep on this one. So, I definitely want to walk through it. This is about the Phillips Pathway for Inclusive Leadership co-curricular program. And this is a newish program that Columbia has created. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk in the world about DEI, inclusivity in general, equality in general. So this is a program they've created to create inclusive thinking, to create inclusion in general, and to really build that culture of inclusive leadership within Columbia. So the question here is to describe a time or situation when you had the need to utilize one or more of the 5 skills mentioned above, and tell us the actions you took and the outcome. And the 5 inclusive skills here are mitigating bias and prejudice, managing intercultural dialogue, addressing systemic inequity, understanding identity and perspective taking, and creating an inclusive environment. Now, this is a bit of a hefty ask for just 250 words, so let's talk about this one. The first thing people need to do is actually read about this Phillips Pathway curriculum, which shortened is PPIL. Literally read about it on the Columbia website so you understand what they're talking about. Even if you take 10 minutes, just get a sense of what this program is. The next thing to do is you need to choose a relevant situation. I typically say that you want to pick one of these skills. Sometimes you may have a story that aligns to 2 of these skills, but I really would prefer that you focus on just one. You have 250 words here, so be wise about telling more detail about one situation versus trying to sandwich in multiple situations or multiple skills. It'll become too vague, too messy, and you just won't get into the true nitty-gritty of what they're looking for in this question. Once you actually have a situation that you want to talk about that aligns to one skill, then you'll set the scene. You want to provide some context for the situation. The key here are the people involved and the challenges you faced. So the context is probably going to be fairly short. You really want to get to the point very quickly here. So again, the challenges you faced, what was the blockade, what was the issue here? That's the key thing that you want to be showcasing. Then we get into really the meat and potatoes of this essay where you want to spend most of your time describing your actions and then the outcome and your reflection. Those are what's going to be most important here. So describing your actions, this is really important where you want to showcase specifically what you did, especially if this was in some sort of a team situation. Really make sure that you're identifying the we versus the I, right? What did the team do versus what did I do? And make sure that you're clearly showcasing whatever that inclusive leadership skill is through the actions you took. So make sure that you're actually very much clearly articulating, I helped to create an inclusive environment because, for example, I went to leadership and asked if we could create an employee resource group for Black and Latinx employees, or whatever it may be. So really spoon feed that to Columbia. Don't make them think about, oh, wait, how does this relate back to this leadership skill? Don't be coy. Really state in plain language how it relates. And then lastly, a good point here is if you did anything innovative or creative or kind of out of the box, definitely share those actions as part of your story. And then lastly, you get some brownie points here if you can showcase both soft and hard skills that are relevant to your story. The hard skills are a little bit more challenging to fit into the story because it tends to be more about soft skills, EQ, communication, leadership. But if there is a hard skill you can throw in, then brownie points. Next here, we have sharing the outcome. So once you've described your actions, you want to explain the results, right? So what was the outcome? What happened? How did this actually improve how people felt about whatever the skill is that you build? How did you improve the situation? How did you create a more inclusive environment? Small impact is okay as long as it's clear and that it's you who actually created it, right? So small is okay. You don't have to have completely reinvented the wheel, but again, just make sure that it's very clear, whatever it is that you did. I also like to add a reflection here. It can just be 1 or 2 sentences at the end. What did you learn from the experience, and maybe how has this shaped your perspective on inclusivity or leadership or how you lead? Again, this is going to be on the shorter side because Columbia really wants to know about the actions and the outcome. But I love adding in a little line about, hey, this is what I learned, or this has really impacted how I think about utilizing this skill or how I think about leadership going forward. So if you can add that in, that's really helpful. And I see, by the way, there's some items coming into the chat. I'm going to hold on questions until the end. So if you don't mind, you're absolutely welcome to add your questions into the chat, but we're going to take a moment at the end to answer those. So if you don't mind, either hold on to them or you can place them in the chat. So now we are at the last essay question. And this one I think is really important for Columbia. So I have a lot of advice on this one. They talk about how Columbia Business School is a special place. And they ask, why do you feel Columbia Business School is a good fit for you academically, culturally, and professionally? Please be specific. Again, 250 words, very short, not a lot of room here, but they are very clearly showing they want to know, are they a fit for you? Are you fit for them? So this is a super important essay to make sure Columbia feels really comfortable giving you an acceptance. So I have a ton of different notes on this particular essay that we should talk through. The first note is, if CBS is your first choice, don't hesitate to say that. This is the perfect essay to say, like, hey, Columbia is my number one. I love Columbia. If they're not your number one, you can still say, oh, I'm really excited about Columbia. Of course, if that's true, hopefully it is. So don't be afraid to say something like that in this essay. You also want to make sure that before you ever start writing this essay, I've seen this happen before where sometimes clients will just kind of jump in and they don't have enough specific information or research to really write this essay properly. This is not the essay where you want to say, oh, Columbia has a great courses in finance. It's like, well, yeah, every other top business school does. What's specific about Columbia that works for you? So make sure you do that due diligence. Go on their website, talk to current students or professors or network, or do whatever you need to do in order to make sure you have clarity on what are the specific things that Columbia has to offer that work for you and the aforementioned career goals you've talked about in the first essay. If you like, you're always welcome to mention a student or professor or someone that you talked with if it's relevant for this essay. So for example, say you are interested in family business and you talked to the current president of the Family Business Club at Columbia, you can say, hey, in my conversation with Johnny Jones, your current president of the Family Business Club, I learned about blah, blah, blah. So that's also a really nice way here to show, hey, I've done my research. So that's something you can consider doing. Not necessary, but something that I think can be super helpful to you. My next point here is, once you've done all this research and you have all these ideas and notes and specific things to talk about, the structure is really important. Do not overthink this. You want an academic paragraph, a professional fit paragraph, and a cultural fit paragraph. 1, 2, 3. Very simple. And I would dive right in. You only have 250 words. If you have an intro sentence, it would be something like, I think Columbia is my number one choice, and this is why. Otherwise, you can just jump right in. You can literally say, academically, Columbia is a great fit because, and go right into it. You can also, if you choose, have a one sentence conclusion, which could be something like, for all the aforementioned reasons, I'm really excited to join your community next year, or something like that. But again, this essay, keep it really simple, no fluff, no major intro or conclusion. They really want you to get into that nitty gritty. So go ahead and jump right into the essay. Now, let's talk about a few other ways of how we want to tackle this now that you're actually starting to write it. You have your structure, you've got academic, professional, and cultural, 3 different paragraphs. How do you now further be strategic? One thing is, remember any unique things about the school. As I mentioned earlier, Columbia wants to know that you're aware of unique things about the school. So for example, they love that they're based in New York. They're the only M7 school that's based in New York. They have some really specific classes. And for example, real estate, maybe you talk about that. Additionally, use Columbia language, such as their cluster system or learning teams. Different schools use slightly different words. Wharton, I think, uses cohort. So make sure you're using Columbia's specific language here. Next, we can talk about academic fit. When you think about academic fit, there's lots of things you can talk about. Courses, concentrations, programs within the school, clubs, professors, There's so many different things you can talk about. And I highly recommend not just talking about classes. It's pretty easy to Google a couple of different classes from their curriculum. Try to be thoughtful and mention maybe a club or a professor or some sort of other program that academically is going to help you get the skills that you need to fill the gaps to meet your goals. So again, make sure all of this is tying back to your earlier essay about, hey, this is my 3 to 5 year plan. This is my long-term vision. This is what I bring to the table. Make sure that this makes sense where you can say, oh, as I previously mentioned, I need to build my skills in marketing. That's why Professor so-and-so's class is perfect for what I want to do. Blah, blah, blah. So again, make sure you're mentioning at least 2 different types of academic things, not just class names. Really do your effort here to showcase that you understand all the different opportunities for you to learn. Next, we have the professional fit. Again, lots of different things for you to talk about. Don't just talk about one thing. Mention at least 2 different types of things here. The types of things you can talk about could be Columbia's strong network, their internal career services, any employment data, such as, oh, I see that you've placed X amount of people at XYZ company in 2023, or whatever it may be. There's also professional clubs. For example, they have the Management Consulting Association. Maybe you're trying to break into McKinsey. That's a great club to talk about. They also have an executive in residence program that is really quite phenomenal. So perhaps there's somebody there that you're really interested in meeting with who can help you with a specific problem or a specific idea. So again, make sure you're including all these different types of things, or at least 2 different types of things that they have available. Lastly, I think it's really helpful sometimes to talk about how Columbia's location allows you really networking access to almost any industry you can think of. So that can be really helpful in terms of, hey, I can literally have coffee or lunch almost any day with alumni who are local, who stayed in New York City, and who are in a plethora of industries. And then lastly, something here that I think is really interesting that people sometimes don't think of is the idea of Columbia allowing for in-semester internships. Again, because of its location, it's really easy for you to do an in-semester internship that would be hybrid or even in person if it was just a few days a week, because you are local in Manhattan. And Columbia does happen to have a fairly flexible student schedule. So I think that the in-semester internships, especially if you're a career switcher, could actually be a really good point to make here. All right, so now we're getting to the end of my notes here on how to tackle it. A few more things to think about. The final paragraph you're writing is on that cultural fit. This tends to be the hardest paragraph I find for people to write about because you haven't actually gone to Columbia yet, right? All you know is kind of what you've been able to tell from talking to different people or perhaps going to the campus. So, this is really where your due diligence is going to pay off, where you can talk about a campus visit or a specific online admissions event or a classroom visit or the fact that you've spoken with current students or alumni. That's going to really help you out here. Even if you don't live in New York City, even if you can't get to the campus, you can still connect with alumni over Zoom. You can still go to an online event. You can still get a sense of what the culture and community is. A couple of things I have to share about what I feel is important to Columbia and the community is that it's highly collaborative and they really believe in that diversity of thought. So sharing interesting perspectives, having thought leadership, and then lastly, inclusive leadership, which we saw in that second essay, which literally is all about inclusive leadership. So these are a couple of things you can think about when you're talking about cultural fit. And certainly, again, definitely lean on conversations you can have with alumni or with current students here. So other than that, the last thing I want to mention here, now that we've gone through, we really had to tackle this from soup to nuts. One other thing that I think is important that sometimes people miss with this essay is not only obviously they ask about professional, academic, and cultural, but it can be nice if you have a little room in this essay under cultural or perhaps as an additional very brief conclusion. It can be nice to talk about the personal aspects of why Columbia is a fit for you. So, for example, do you have family or friends or some sort of supportive community in the area? Are there cultural aspects of New York City that work for you, like visiting museums, being able to relax by going to a gallery at the end of a busy day? Things like this can be kind of a cool thing to include where you may or may not have the space. I can share for myself, Columbia had a little bit of a different take on this essay when I applied, because they're always slightly changing their essay questions, but they did ask a little bit about, what it would mean to you to be in the center of business in New York City. And I talked about being able to, of course, not only utilize New York's location for professional development, for networking, for in-semester internships, because I was a career switcher, but also I said, hey, it's really important to me to be around the arts. And New York City is literally the epicenter of that. I can go to the Met Opera, I can go to the Philharmonic, I can go to Broadway, I can go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And I said, that's going to be really important to me to relax and unwind after a busy day of recruiting or being in classes. So this is kind of, again, like a little bit of an extra nugget. You don't have to include it, but I think it can be kind of a fun way to add a little extra something to your essay, even if it's a sentence or something super brief that you throw in. So something to think about. And I think that brings us to the end of all my points. I know that was a lot to digest. So if people have questions, I am absolutely more than happy to answer them. And I'm going to go ahead. I don't think I need to screen. Oh, let me bring up this screen for you guys, just in case you guys want to write down my code or, look me up online while I answer some questions. I think, Erica, I think I see some in the chat. Erica, should I just go ahead and start with the chat? All right, cool.
People can message you directly on Zoom with any questions or just simply come off mute.
All right, perfect. So guys, I'm going to start with, it looks like I have a few in the chat here, so I'm going to go ahead and start answering them. Feel free to keep sending them. This one is from Selena. So she asked, does the example have to have happened in the workplace, or can it have happened in a professional association outside of work? So this must be about essay number 2, which is about inclusive leadership, where you used one of those 5 inclusive leadership skills. So Selena, that's a great question. It can be in work or even in an academic setting or even in a personal setting. I would prefer, of course, that it's in a professional setting. As you mentioned, a professional association outside of work absolutely works very well. So that absolutely works. So something professional related is preferable here. If someone doesn't have something to talk about, but has a really strong story from maybe an academic experience within the last few years or from a personal experience, then yes, that's also something that can be considered. So Selena, great question there. And let's see. So someone asked, do you recommend this particular order or is that on a case-by-case basis? So I'm not sure what that refers to. So if someone wants to go ahead and write in the chat what their question referred to, happy to go ahead.
Jump in if that's okay, if that's easier.
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
just a quick question on the order. So for example, essay 1, you were like, okay, you're showing your goals for 3 to 5 years and then longer term, and then you kind of work down, and then at the end it's like a sentence or 2 on the mission. Like, do you recommend that particular order, or is the order not really?
Got it. So the order really for what your outline should be for essay number 1. Got it. So there is no particular order that you have to go into. However, I think what can be really helpful is very clearly articulating pretty immediately, my 3 to 5 year goal is XYZ, and my long-term vision is blah, blah, blah. That can be a really nice intro where it's very clear immediately answering the question. Here it is. Then you go into detail. Then you can say, to back up for a moment or to explain why this is of interest to me, I am motivated because of these reasons. This is how my professional background comes into play. I have these 3 existing skills. This was my light bulb moment, etc. So I think it can be really nice to just hit them with the facts immediately up front and then go into all of the detail. I've also seen people do a really lovely job of starting with here's my vision 3 to 5 years out of business school, and talking a little bit about their why, and then going into, and that's why my long-term vision is such and such. So both can work. But if you're stuck, start with super easy. Here it is, 3 to 5 years, long-term vision, boom, 2 to 3 sentences, and then go into the why, the background, how your current experience aligns to it. So that can be a really easy way to just kind of get those key goals out of the way so that you can go more into the pros.
Gotcha. Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So let's see. So we have a question here that says, I heard Columbia added a community question. Do you have any tips for that? So I'm not sure what you're referring to. We went through the questions here that are on the application. So this could be potentially you're thinking about that second question, which is about inclusive leadership. Please let me know if there's something else that you're referring to. But these are the Columbia essay questions. So these are absolutely the ones you're going to see in your application. There is more of a community question on Wharton's application, so that would be something a little different. Let's see, next question here. So the next one is, how do you get yourself to write the essay in a thoughtful manner, especially when you are working full time? Great question, right? It is tough to apply to business school when you're working full time. Trust me, I had no social life when I was applying to business school for a good 2 months because I was studying for the GMAT last minute. Do not recommend doing that. And I was working full time and I was writing my essays. So that was insane. So there was a good 2 months where I had no life. Honestly, what I would say to do here is you've got to plan your time and you've got to schedule your calendar now through Christmas. You do not want to be writing essays last minute on New Year's or during your Christmas break. Trust me, it is terrible. It happens every year to clients. Do not do it. You need to schedule your time right now. After this call, go through your calendar and schedule time as if it's a doctor's appointment. It's sacred. You can't move it. Schedule it whenever you can during a lunch hour break, before work, after work, on the weekends, whatever works for you. It is going to be tough and it's going to be a crunch, but if you can commit to that crunch over the next 2 weeks, then in my opinion, it's worth its weight in gold in terms of what the outcome is going to be. So that's going to be the best way to really have a great essay is you've got to manage your time and you've got to project manage this and plan up front. Additionally, what I would also want to mention here is you use the word thoughtful. It's really important in these essays to showcase a little bit of that motivation or your personal why, right? I talked about that, especially with essay number 1. Share a little bit of who you are, right? Don't be afraid to add that little extra something of, oh, I really am passionate about this long-term goal because of this thing that happened in my life, or because of my mother, or because of whatever it may be. So don't be afraid to add that, and it'll really help these essays to be much more thoughtful. So hopefully that helps to answer the question. All right, we got a bunch of questions coming in. So let's see, the next one. Sometimes the interviewer asks if we have applied to other schools and what is the status of our application there. Why do you think they ask this question and how should we answer it? So that's a good question. So sometimes I will tell you this, Columbia does not require that question in their interview. It is possible it'll come up though. And they do definitely ask about your plan B being if you don't get into business school this year, what are you going to do? So you always want to be prepared for any interview. If the school asks, what's your plan B? And what other schools did you apply to? It is perfectly reasonable for a school to ask, where else did you apply? Because they're kind of trying to suss out how serious are you about our program. If you, for example, applied to, I'm making this up, but say you applied to London Business School and you said in your application, I love London, I have to be in Europe, but you also applied to Stanford. They'll be like, well, are you actually serious about being in Europe? So that's kind of what they're getting at, is they're trying to get a sense of what's going on here. How serious are you? I would be as honest and as vague as possible. So you could say something like in your Columbia interview, say this comes up, you could say, well, I am really excited about Columbia. And again, I really think it's an excellent fit. But of course, I understand it's a really difficult program to get into. And so the logical thing was to apply to a couple of other top programs. And I hope that things work out with Columbia, but I have applied to a couple of other similar programs in M7 schools. They might push you a little bit more for names, but that's the road I would take, is being direct but vague, basically. So that's how I would handle that. So hopefully that helps to answer your question. Let's see. Another note here. So the next one, out of curiosity, what were some of your favorite things about CBS? Honestly, for me, Nathan, it was really being in New York. I was already a New Yorker. I had been in New York for years. I had my friends there, my community. I love that you have everything in New York. So for me, I was such a New Yorker. I was just so happy that I got to stay in New York, that I didn't have to leave. So for me, that was a huge deal. I also really liked how at Columbia you had both a on-campus business school community, but then you also had all of New York City. So I actually really liked that. I did not want to have a more so college campus type of experience. I had that in undergrad. I went to Cornell. So everything was about Cornell. That's all there was. There was nothing else available in upstate New York in Ithaca. Versus if you go to, say, Wharton, for example, it is a little bit more of a bubble because everybody kind of just hangs out with other Wharton people. It's not a good or bad thing. It's just really more of a personal preference. I was also slightly older when I went to business school than the average age. So I think for me, that was just a really good fit to have both a really nice on campus community, but also have a greater community very easily available to me. All right. So let's see the next question. Do you recommend the specific orders you shared for the essays, or does it not matter? So we talked about this briefly earlier. So I think that if you have a question about a specific order I talked about, we could talk about that. Pretty much the way I wrote my notes to you and how I explained it, I tried to do it in such a way where that's how I would think through the essay with you, and it would give you a natural flow for how to write it and the order in which you would write it. So hopefully that helps to answer your question. More or less, yes, what I shared would be a nice outline or a nice flow for your essays. If there's a specific flow question that you have, then please you're welcome to write that in the chat. Can you tell us something about the format of essays? So some schools do require a specific format. Please, 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 please read their applications when you upload your essays. Some schools don't care, some do. Some might say double space and 12-point font. Some may not say anything. So just make sure you're double checking the latest information on Columbia's online portal, the actual application where you're uploading your essays. I personally always say, make sure it's in PDF form. Never, ever attach a Word document. Always attach a PDF so that the formatting, nothing can go wrong in the upload process. I always like to have page numbers. I also like to have your name and what the essay question is at the top. So it'd be your full name. So for me, you say Melanie Espelond, Columbia Business School, essay question, blah, blah, blah. And then what my final word count is. I like to have all that information up front so it's clear and the committee knows exactly what they're looking at. This is also great just in case for some crazy reason a file got lost. I've never heard of that happening. I'm just saying it's good to have everything labeled properly. So those would be some of my pieces of advice. So make sure everything is labeled on the top, PDF, and you should be good to go. For the resume, is it similar to the one we can use when applying for the job? So we did not talk about resumes today, but I will say for any M7 is any top MBA program, do not use your professional resume. It has to be an MBA specific resume. This means you have to have things like your community and leadership involvement. You want to have a lot more information about what you're doing in terms of being a leader at your company or in your community. This is a different type of resume than a professional resume. So since we weren't focusing on resumes in this call, I'll leave it at that, but certainly happy to take that conversation offline. I feel very passionate about making sure your resume is really sharp because it's such an important artifact and cornerstone of your application. So very good question. Okay. So let's see. We've got another question, the optional essay. So this says, with the optional essay, it says it doesn't have to be a formal essay, but is it okay if you do make it more formal? I have a life story I would like to tell that ties the rest of the application together. Oh, that's very interesting. So with the optional essay, it is there for this exact type of reason. If there's something specific or really nuanced about you and your background, and you have not been able to really share that elsewhere in the application, that's why there's an optional essay. So only use the optional essay if you truly do have something else to say. Don't use it to continue to talk about the topics you've already discussed. This is really for somewhere special where you've had a really particular life circumstance or something important that you haven't been able to talk about. So to the person who sent in this question, that sounds really relevant. If you have a particular life story that ties to your career goals or why MBA, excellent place to put that. Yes, I would make it more formal then. Write it in the same tone as you do your other Columbia essays. So that way it's nice and consistent all the way through. Totally okay to write it formally. The schools say it doesn't have to be formal in case you just need to give them a 3-sentence explanation of something. So that's why they say it doesn't have to be formal, but you can certainly write it formally. So hopefully that answers your question. And also, I do want to call out, we are over time. We're at 4:49 Pacific. I will stay on until 5 p.m. Pacific, which is 8 p.m. Eastern. If you do have to drop, this is being recorded. You can always reach me on the Leland website. You have my code here to sign up for 70% off of your first hour of coaching. So please feel free to get in touch with me, ask a question, find me online. But I will stay on for the next 10 minutes or so to keep answering some of these great questions that are coming through. So let's see. We've got another one here. What are some of the things to consider when deciding the time early or later to apply to Columbia? I'm a senior interested in the deferred program. Okay. So the deferred program, this is interesting. It really depends upon why you would be applying now. Why is now the right time? What does your timeline look like over the next, say, 2 years while you're in this deferment time frame? What are you going to be doing with that time? And then what are you going to do when you're at Columbia? And how does this entire timeline make sense for your goals, right? What are you accomplishing in order to actually make better use of the Columbia MBA? So if you can articulate very clearly this entire thought process of, I have planned out the next couple of years and this is what it looks like, then I think it's perfectly reasonable to apply now. Be careful about that. Be really honest with yourself if you actually have a clear answer. What I see typically happen with deferred applicants is that they just didn't really have a clear enough answer for what their plan is and what their career goals are and what this line of sight looks like. Just because you're smart and you have good grades doesn't mean you're going to get into a deferred program. So be honest with yourself about that. That would be my immediate response, not knowing anything else about your background. So hopefully that's helpful to you. Let's see, we've got more questions. I love this. Thank you guys for all the questions. So the next one is from Justin. Hey, Melanie, thanks for doing this session. It's been really helpful. Awesome. How specific do we need to be about the title of our job and our short and long-term goals? Is company or industry specific enough? So again, Justin, I think it's really important to at least have function and your industry. So for example, if you just said, oh, I want to work in, I'm just making this up, I want to work in consumer products. It's like, that's way too vague. Saying I want to work in marketing for consumer products like a Procter and Gamble, much better, because now you're starting to articulate the function, the industry, and the type of company, because there's all different types of companies within an industry. So for example, maybe you actually want to go work for a CPG like an Olipop, which is, for anyone that may know this brand, I think it's in Whole Foods now. It's like a very cool, healthy, kind of artisanal young brand, right? So that would be super different than going to like a Procter and Gamble. So try to be specific about the type of company, the industry, and the function. Adding a suggestive title can be helpful. So for example, based upon your career level, maybe you would say, I would love to be in marketing at a CPG company like an Olipop. I could see my potential title being marketing manager and or digital marketing manager or something like that. So you can include information like that and say, oh, I could see the type of title I may have to be ABC or XYZ. So again, adding that level of detail, I really highly suggest it, Justin. So definitely consider that. I would really love for you to be as specific as you can. Columbia responds really well to that. Okay, next question. Sometimes we are asked a why now question for MBA. What do you think would be the best response? Okay, so this is a good question. It actually relates back to the individual who asked about the deferred MBA, the why now. Timing is important, right? You need to be able to explain what your thought process is, right? You're going to business school. What do you want to gain there? What's the immediate job after school? What's your 3 to 5 year goal? What's the long-term vision? And so it needs to make sense, right? Have you gotten what you need out of your current job or your current industry, or do you have the right skills you need? Plus, you'll fill the gaps with whatever you need at business school in order to get to where you want to go. So this is very specific to every single person. I can't give you an exact response. It depends upon what your story is and what your goals are, but it is important to think about timing. Timing becomes even more important, or why now, the younger you are and the less experience you have, especially if you have less than the average years of experience. So I think now the average MBA at a M7 school like Columbia, I think is probably about 27, if I have that correctly, 26, 27. So say you're 24 and maybe you only have 2 or 3 years of work experience. Why now? Why are you ready? Maybe you are. I mean, I had a client, he had 1 year of work experience at BCG and we got him into Wharton, which I actually even told him, I was like, I think this is a long shot because you have really limited work experience, but we were able to build a really clear case for why now was the right moment based upon his very specific goals. And we made sure that his recommenders also talked about the timing in the recommendations. So hopefully that's helpful to answer this why now question. All right, the next question is from Augustin. So if I have changed careers and have a non-traditional career path, would you recommend that I start my first essay with the background of why I had to start in a different way than I wanted? That's interesting. I don't know if I like that approach, to be honest. So a lot of people go to business school and pivot, right? It's a great way to pivot. It's an excellent way to kind of restart your career. So I actually completely pivoted when I was in business school. I was in the fashion industry and I went to McKinsey. Everyone's like, what? That's crazy. It was a huge pivot. I was coming from a creative background. So I actually don't love this idea of starting on the defensive, right? Oh, well, I didn't start where I wanted to. I have a different background. Don't do that. That is not where you want to start. Do not start on the defensive. You want to be really positive about what makes your background useful or relevant, or what are the transferable skills from your background to your future goal. So I would not start on the defensive. I would start with, again, what are your goals? What's the 3 to 5 year plan? What's your long-term vision? And then you can talk a little bit more about your past, how it aligns or doesn't align to your current goal. And if you are making a huge change, really talk about that origin story or the light bulb moment where you realized, I'm making this up, but you could say, well, I started my career in fashion, but I realized like I actually loved CPG because of this moment that I had, or this conversation, or this thing. That could be really helpful for you if you have such an incredibly different set of goals going forward. I also did do a talk on, I think we might be recorded. Erica could probably answer this, on non-traditional career paths and how to get into a great MBA program, because I was a non-traditional career path. So Erica may be able to answer if there's a recording of that available, but I did do that talk recently for Leland. And again, that's something I feel really comfortable coaching on. So if anybody wants to chat with me about non-traditional backgrounds offline, absolutely happy to do that. All right, we got a ton more questions. I'm going to try to answer a few more. So let's see. I have someone who says, I am based in NYC, but unfortunately have not had the chance to do a campus class visit. Is that really frowned upon? Yes. Immediately going to tell you yes. That is not good. Would it be a plus to indicate somewhere that I've scheduled one? Um, go now, go next week. I don't understand why you haven't done it. You're in New York City, go. They're going to be like, why didn't you come? That's going to be a huge red flag for Columbia specifically. Other schools wouldn't care as much. Like, for example, Harvard, if you're in Boston, would be kind of like, that's a little weird, but they wouldn't be as offended. Columbia will be offended. Make sure you have stuff scheduled now. If your application is round 2 and it's only due in January, you have time before January to get an on-campus visit done. So I would get that scheduled immediately. Let's see. Next question. So for the PPIL essay, so again, for everyone, that was the inclusive leadership essay. So essay number 2, should we always try to find an inclusivity problem that we were able to solve directly? Does that mean it would not be a good topic to talk about how we solve a bias around age? Oh, that totally works. Inclusivity doesn't have to be gender or ethnicity. That could be age. There's plenty of age discrimination out there, for example. I actually did have a client in round 1 talk about an age discrimination issue on his team, and it was like a generational issue where a manager on his team and an analyst level person just saw things really differently, and there were a lot of assumptions being made by the manager about this person, and they just had such different viewpoints and they weren't talking. So it was creating an incredible amount of tension, and this manager was feeling very frustrated and starting to disclude this person or just almost discredit them. And so my client came in and said, hey, to the manager, I really think that this is an issue of being from different generations, and like, I think you two need to just have a conversation. So age totally works, right? Again, if you really read the question, there's 5 different skills they talk about, such as mitigating bias, creating an inclusive environment. That can mean bias, and inclusion can mean a lot of different things, right? Again, it doesn't just have to be ethnicity. It can be gender, it can be age, it can be religion. So this definitely works to talk about age. Obviously, we're not going and solving all of these huge problems at a huge organization ourselves, right? The key here is, you mentioned, does it matter if it's solved directly? You have to show that you personally made some sort of an impact. So again, if your contribution was small, that's okay. You just have to be very clear about, you did these 3 things or you did these 2 things, and that led to a certain outcome that was positive. So hopefully that helps to answer your question. Okay, so here's another one. If you're applying via the consortium, does CBS read the consortium essays alongside your essay applications, or do they review it after they decide they like you, want you, and are deciding scholarships? I am not 100% sure about this. The consortium, I'm not 100% sure how those rules apply. I would imagine, though, that they are going to review your application in full and decide if they're moving you to an interview way before they would even think about scholarships. Because in the general population of people applying, they are also being considered for merit-based scholarships. So that would be my assumption. Do double check with the consortium directly on this, but that would be my assumption based upon my experiences with the admissions committee. Okay, so let's see. We got another question. Are we able to go 5% above the word limit? No, don't do it. Why do that to yourself, right? Follow basic directions. Do not go above the word limit, not even by 1 word. I just think it's silly, right? They've given you clear instructions, just don't do it. Why annoy the admissions officer? Why give them a reason to say, oh, forget this person? They didn't follow the instructions. Don't do it. Hire a coach, hire someone like me if you need help to review your word count. I do have some clients where we would literally sit together and I would actually go through word by word and edit it down to remove those extra 30 words or whatever it is. So not worth it. Do not do that to yourself. Okay, I think that we are at, oh my gosh, we're past the hour. So unfortunately, everybody, I do need to drop because we are now more than 15 minutes past our end time. But this was incredible. Thank you so much for everybody for joining. Really appreciate just the incredible amount of questions and the engagement. There's so much to talk about. The applications process is hard. It's really complicated. And there's a lot that if you don't know, like, how would you know, right? I've been doing this now for over 8 years. I was an MBA myself. I interview people. There's just a lot of knowledge you gain over time. So it's okay to not know. I highly recommend if you have specific questions to engage somebody who is an expert. Your friends and family, if they're not experts in the subject, they actually may not know or they may lead you astray. So just be careful about whom you're going to advice for. If you want to reach out, Erica put my profile in the chat on Leland. You have my discount code. I hope to hear from a lot of you. So please feel free to message me on Leland, and I look forward to keeping the conversation going. Thank you so much. Have a good night.